Very good. Can everyone see that?
I believe so.
Okay, I assume the answer is yes. This is the iPhora Flow user interface. And right now we can see that it has a few applications already created within it. And in this case, I'm going to create an application for the purpose of processing field service requests. And I'm not going to go through every step of the process to the nth degree, but I'm going to show the major steps in the process so you can get a good flavor of what it's like designing something in iPhora Flow. So I start out by clicking on a button called Create. And here it gives me a little wizard so that I can create the application itself. It'll need a title, it'll need a description, and just for speed here, I'm just going to use the exact same thing as the title for the description. It asks for a category or one or more so that if you see a list of different applications available, they can be categorized and organized in different ways. On the second tab of the wizard, very important, this setting here, workflow application, I'm going to turn that to yes. In this particular case, I want to be able to create workflows and processes as opposed to just creating forms. The deployment in this case, I think it's going to be organizational for a lot of people to use within the organization, but I could also select a team. For example, I could limit it to internal users or internal and external users. And during the setup of iPhora, you could actually set up different types of work teams and groups. So this list could be populated quite extensively. So in this case, we're just going to do an organizational level one. And I'm going to move on to the next step of the wizard. Here it's asking me if I want to do just a single or multi-workflow application. I think the single workflow one is fine for this example, so I'm going to set that. There's a visual icon it's going to need. I'm not too big visually at picking these things, so I'll just randomly pick something. And a background color. And when I move on, now this is interesting. It's asking me to select what workflow roles will be needed for this. This is a default set that was created during the installation of iPhora. And these map to different types of groups and things of users. But you can use the defaults or you can rename them as needed. And in this case, I do want to rename one of these because I think it'll work better with this particular application. So let's change this one, Approver 1. I actually want to make this one called Supervisor, because in this context, Supervisor is more what I'm thinking of. The other ones I'm going to leave as is. And now I see a summary of all of my settings. So I am going to click Next. And over here, the Field Service Report Processing application is now there. I'm going to click to open that. And you can think of an application in iPhora Flow as a container of forms and processes. So at this point, we need to add a form. So I click on New Form. And I'm going to give the form a title. And it's just going to be something as simple as Field Service Report. Put in a description. Will this particular form be workflow enabled? Yes, it is going to be. Otherwise, it kind of invalidates a great deal of what we're trying to show today. Summary of my settings. So I go ahead. And now it puts me into the design mode for creating a form. It's kind of a visual form creator. In some ways, it's not hugely different from how you would create a form in the Domino Designer. There are a lot of containers, resources, widgets you can select from the left side and then simply drag them in and put them where you want them to be. I think I'm going to start out with something, let's see, as simple as a text block at the top. Let's put a name for this particular form. And everything has properties, so I'm going to set this to just be a large block of text that says Field Service Report. In terms of organizing how the stuff is going to appear, I'm going to use the concept of rows. So I'm going to pull in a row with 2 columns and underneath it another row with 2 columns. We also have various rows that are 1 column and also rows like 2 by 1, which is kind of a row that's 2/3 wide and then 1/3 wide. And by doing it this way, it automatically fits in with the responsive nature of it, and then things will adjust in size very nicely, even though when a user looks at it, they won't see these shaded areas that actually represent the columns. Next, we need to populate some fields into here. And I'm not going to populate all the possible fields we're going to need. I'm going to put in a few things which I think are good examples to have. Let's throw in a combo box, which is essentially a list box that will display a list and you select something from it. We need to set properties for it. So I'm going to give it a reference name because it's always good to have that. We're going to call this service type. Give it a label so that the user can actually see what it is, and we're going to call that service type. I'm going to say it's required, so the user really has to fill this thing out or they can't move forward. I'm going to turn on a feature here called available as branching key, which is very useful because that means that this particular field can be used as the subject or the decision-making node for a branch operation. And now I have to figure out what kind of data is going to go in here. We can actually select list objects, provisioning rules, or services. There are a lot of different ways in iPhora you can populate a combo box list, but the simplest one for this is that there are only two labels I want in here, two particular things to populate this. I want the word warranty, and I want the word billable. There are two states for something like this. It's either going to be warranty work where it's free, or billable work where essentially it's going to get charged for. So I click on update, and now that particular combo box entry field has been created. I think I'll quickly add in a contact as well. It's very similar to a combo box. The reason why we use a different type of object though for it is that unlike a combo box, this is going to hold personal information. It's going to hold a reference point to someone they can pull in an email address, a name, a title, all kinds of things. Therefore, it's subject to a higher level of security. Our contact objects are all certified with GDPR compatibility so that all of the user data, personal data that's in the system is safe to GDPR standards. The data source in this case, I'm just going to say is all external contacts. I'll do an update. And the only other thing I think is a good example, I want to pull in a file uploader. Yes, because in this case, they're going to have to upload some kind of a signature file from the user. So I'll just give this a reference name for report. Name of this thing will be upload signed report. And as you can see, you can just go further and further and add more fields to this kind of a form. I'm going to save it for now. And the form is done. So I'm now going to move over to the process itself. And we're going to give the process a title. The exact same thing for the description for now. And now in this process, we have to pick what form it's going to operate in conjunction with. And you know, there's only one form in this application right now. So we're going to wind up using the field service report. Click on next. Oh, and here's that list of roles we were talking about before. We're going to pull in the ones that we think we need for this particular workflow process. The supervisor, the submitter, and I think I'll also use an approver too. A summary of all my selections. And at this point, kind of the skeleton of the process has been created. So I will click on here, and now we get to the visual tool. This is how we actually build the actual steps involved of one of these workflow processes. It looks much like a workflow, or essentially a flow chart is probably the best way to look at it. And it's step-based, and each task represents a step. So I'm going to pull in one task right here. And I'm going to connect it together. And the tasks really all have their own properties. So this is going to be task 1. I'm going to give it a name. Let's see, let's call this one prepare report. Description doesn't really matter at this point. This is just a fast demo. Who's going to do this one? Well, these are the roles available. It's going to be done by the submitter, which in this case means almost anyone in the company can actually submit one of these things. We have something called initialize. That corresponds to this little blue circle or little blue square on the top. Those are input connections into the task. And they essentially can initialize certain settings for that task, and that's what we use it for. So I'm going to add a checklist of items that will appear on screen and get initialized. I'm going to call one, let's say simply fill in all fields. It's kind of an instruction to the user. And add another one. Let's see, I'm going to add in another one that says, oops, hold that.
The next button, Rob.
You're right, another one. This one is going to be upload signed report. And something I'm going to need later, and it'll be evident why I'll need that later, I'm going to add in one more of these input nodes called revise. Now I'm going to move down here. This is the section where the output connection for this particular task exists. And by default, it gets one called accept. That's perfectly fine. It's just I would prefer a slightly different name for it. So instead of seeing an accept button, the user will see a submit button. The button will do exactly the same thing, but it'll make more sense to the user that it's called submit. So I'm going to click on that. And okay, that first task is all set up. If they submit it, it's going to go out this particular output handler, and we'll move that down to another task. And before it goes to that task, you could put actions between tasks. You could put any number of actions, and we call that an action stream. So in this case, I want to put in a notify action. I'm just going to connect these things together. The notify action is going to send an email notification, or we could set it up to do other things as well, to the supervisor. We'll pick one of a whole slew of built-in templates, and you can customize and make your own templates. This will just what we call workflow standard advance. It lets the person know that there's a workflow waiting for them, and it provides a link for it. Who it's going to go to, we select the role, and we say this is going to the supervisor, so it's going to go to the person who's been specified as the supervisor for this one. You can also put in carbon copy or blind carbon copy, but this notify node is completely set up now. This task down here is the one that's going to be done by the supervisor. So I'm going to call this one supervisor review. And the performer, not too surprisingly, is going to be the supervisor. I'm not going to put in any initialization checklist things for now, but I do want to add some things down here in the area where the actions are. In this case here, the supervisor is going to approve or reject. So I'm going to change the name of the accept one into an approve button. It still does the same functionality, it's just now called approve. And I'm going to add another one, and this time it's going to be a decline type of connection. And I'm also going to change the name of the decline one just because it sounds a bit harsh to say we're declining this. We'll just say something pleasant like please revise. And in this case here, if they select please revise, I want them to be forced to enter into a comment. So they should explain why they're demanding this thing be revised. So I click on update. And yes, this decline action or this decline connection right here appears. And what I can do now is I can pull in another notify node. I could connect to that. I could set up this notify as a notification that goes to the submitter. And then I could pull in a connection, make a connection that goes to this. Remember, we created this revise entry point up here on the first one. I could connect it that way, and then just to neaten it up, pull this over here. So just like that, a rejection step, a revise step, sends a notification to the submitter and routes the workflow back to that point. So that alone gives you a lot of power in terms of how you want to structure things here. Something that gives you even more power is this concept of branching. And here's another type of action. This is a branch action. And again, you use the branch action just by filling out properties. I'm going to give this thing a name. I'm going to call it warranty question mark, or warranty question mark. What's it going to do? I'm going to create a rule to determine how it operates. And these rules are set up similar to the way some rules in Lotus Notes and Domino are. Oh, remember when I created the form, we created something called service type as a field. And it can have values of warranty or billable. Well, in this case, I'm going to say if service type is warranty, I'm going to create that as a rule. And then you could actually add in additional rules. You could combine many fields together with essentially a Boolean logic, and the final result has to be a true-false value. After you've done that, then over down here, if the final result is true, you click here and say, okay, I want the downward direction. We're going to connect going out that way. If it's going to be false, the false decision point is going to go out to the right. So click on update, and yes, we now have connectors on the bottom and on the right. So if warranty happens to be true, it's going to go out the bottom branch. If warranty is not true, if it's billable, it's going to go out to the right. So what could I do with that? I could pull in a notification here, connect it to that. I could set up this notification to go to the accounting department. And then I could put a task down here underneath it, essentially that says, okay, accounting department, you guys invoice the customer. When it's done invoicing, then I can have another task, let's say down here, And I then can set up another entry point on this one and then connect this task back into this one here. So we could have a branch that goes off in order to take care of the invoicing, and then it swings back and comes into the main branch. So it all works very well. And as you can see, between putting in as many notifications you want and as many branches and different types of tasks, you can accomplish a lot. There's now one more type of action that really makes the thing kind of amazing in some ways. And this is this thing here. This is an event. An event node can do many things. An event, for example, can write into an Excel document. It could generate a report or a PDF file. It could read data from an Excel document. It can interact with third-party services like Zoom or DocuSign. It can do all of those things. In general, this is the one part of it that needs to be set up by someone who's a real programmer and knows what they're doing. But the important thing is, once they've set up certain event nodes to do certain things, a user, let's say a typical user doing exactly what I'm doing here, all they have to do is drag it in and connect to it, and then set up some properties. Properties are pretty simple for these kinds of things. Select from a list of different events that are available in this application. And for reasons that will be evident later, we're doing a lot of Zoom stuff right now. So we could say, create a Zoom meeting. And in that case, assuming the back-end workflow document had fields pertaining to a Zoom meeting, like start time, panelists, that information, this would go ahead, interact with Zoom and do that. So as you can see, it's a very powerful system. You can achieve a lot, and yet it's extremely simple to use. And actually, it's kind of fun to use. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing for now and let it go back to Richard and his presentation.